You know that strange feeling at the end of the day, when it seems like nothing bad has happened, but inside, there remains a quiet dissatisfaction with yourself. It's as if you've missed something again, but you can't quite put your finger on where exactly. The day has passed. There were things to do. There were conversations, maybe even some small victory, but it still feels that way, as if life is passing you by. Sometimes they call it a residue. Sometimes they call it procrastination. Sometimes it's just not your day. And from the outside, it's often processed very simply. Lack of discipline, lack of motivation, bad habits, as if the problem is that you're simply not trying hard enough. But that's usually not the case. There are things that seem mundane, everyday actions. They are so habitual that they cease to feel like a choice. And it's precisely these things that gradually create this impression, as if you're not living your life quite right. There's more going on here than meets the eye. What are commonly called destructive habits rarely appear destructive. Sometimes they're isolated and logical, sometimes even like that. For example, the habit of opening the beginning, not because you're lazy, but because there's anticipation inside. A pleasant moment, when energy arises, clarity, mood. It seems like you're simply preparing, but in fact, at that moment, your brain is perhaps avoiding uncertainty. Any new action is a risk. The nervous system is designed to reduce this risk, even if that means standing still. And that's not weakness, it's protection. There's another habit, too, constantly analyzing yourself. What you said, how you look, are you good enough? This can seem like mindfulness, but inside, this often turns into constant tension, when every action is filtered too strictly, and at some point, you start not doing better, but doing less, because it's too difficult to solve. And that's not a mistake either. This often happens where, before, a mistake would have cost too much, where being different meant losing something important. There's another quiet habit, devaluing what already exists, not necessarily directly. Sometimes it's just a thought. It could be better, or it's not that important. Outwardly, this looks like growth, but inside, it creates a feeling that the present is never enough, as if life is always somewhere ahead. And this is no coincidence either. If you get used to receiving brains only from the future, it ceases to be a wonderful gift. There are also more subtle things. For example, the habit of agreeing when inside you're feeling no. It's out of weakness. It's to maintain the connection, to avoid conflict, to avoid creating tension. It may look like kindness, but over time, it creates a gap between what you feel and what you show. And this gap cools like the wind. What a complex explanation. What's important here is something else. None of these habits make you worse. This isn't a mistake. It's an adaptation. They once helped you cope. What's limiting now was what you managed to protect yourself from before. And therein lies the paradox. These habits simultaneously help and restrain yourself. They create a sense of control, but they reduce the space for living. They protect you from pain, but at the same time, they dampen joy. The desire to analyze everything makes you deeper and more attentive, but sometimes it distances you from ease. Waiting for the perfect moment speaks of sensitivity to quality, but I can follow the movement. The desire to agree makes you comfortable for others, but sometimes it erases you. And this isn't something that needs to be urgently corrected. It's something you can begin to notice. No pressure, no judgment. Just see. Notice how you procrastinate. Not because you can't, but because you're trying to protect yourself. Notice how you analyze. Not because you're not good enough, but because you're used to surviving that way. Notice how you devalue. Not because you're ungrateful, but because you're always looking further. And in this place, something important happens. Space appears. You don't need to change right away. You don't need to become different. Sometimes it's easy enough to see, and gradually, opportunity arises. Sometimes I start without an ideal state. Sometimes I allow myself not to fully know. Sometimes it's acknowledging that something valuable already exists, not as a rule, as an experience. And perhaps the most influential thing here is that there is nothing wrong with you to begin with. These habits aren't random. They were part of how you learn to live in this world. It's just that now, they don't always work the way they used to. And if you recognize yourself in this, perhaps this is just the beginning of a deeper understanding, where you stop activating automatically and begin to truly notice yourself. And sometimes that's enough for everything to begin to change.